It's the Leading on Purpose podcast, helping leaders, teams, and organizations lead more intentionally, effectively, and with purpose. Welcome back. Doug and I are excited to continue yet again this what may seem like a long, drawn-out conversation related to change leadership, but there's just so much ground to cover. Our hope in today's episode is that we're able to put a bow around things and really kind of talk about that third phase we haven't covered yet in terms of the leadership and communication style that's best suited for the third phase of the change curve. And then Doug and I plan to kind of zoom out and just talk in general in terms of best practices and leadership approaches that really serve you well as a leader of change. So, Doug, ready to talk more change?
Absolutely. Absolutely, John.
Awesome. So maybe a couple steps back just to remind everyone where we left off. We'd spent a lot of time talking about the first two phases of the change curve. First one being endings, and the experience that individuals are having in that phase is really where that sense of loss, they're coming to terms with what's going away, what's no longer going to be the same. And so what we talked about in terms of leadership approaches or communication styles in that phase that are best suited for success, information, getting the facts out, being honest and direct with people around, here's what's coming, here's what I know, here's what I don't know. And then tomorrow we're going to need to talk again because there's going to be new information. And so the job of providing that clarity and information is really never done. You got to continue to do it because the headlines kind of change, but it's all about information. The second phase, and we describe this sometimes can feel like the pit of despair, and I think some models actually call it that. It's this low place that people go through where they're coming to terms with things. Do I want to do this? Do I want to take on this change? Do I want to be part of this? If so, can I do it? If I can do it, what will I need to be able to do it the new way that's being asked? And so the communication style, i.e. leadership, that's best suited for that phase, because it's called explorations. People are kind of exploring, again, how do I feel? How do I do this? Is support and really taking the time as a leader to meet people where they are and appreciate that this is a phase they have to go through. And support also looks like what type of training and resources can I provide you to help, get you on your way. And so it can be a tough place. I would say this third phase, which is new beginnings, and this is where people are starting to gain probably some momentum around the change. They're starting to learn to do the new thing the new way. They're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Hey, I get it now. I see it. I'm embracing it. It's arguably for me the easiest of the three phases as a leader. However, it's also the easiest to miss and forget to do. And the reason that is, we've talked about this idea of the curve that people are going through as they go through these three phases. Well, that curve is in relation to people's kind of status quo line. So again, if you could imagine a horizontal line that represents people's kind of normal level of morale, acceptance, engagement, performance, all of those things that are part of this human experience and part of people's work. Once we get through that pit of despair and we get back to the point of status quo of where we were before, and we've said this before, it's very easy as a leader to say, okay, we're done. Let our foot off the gas and we'll move on to the next thing. Well, as we said before, now you just went through all that for nothing. We realized no gains. And when we make modest changes inside an organization, it's about elevating the level of performance, morale, acceptance, engagement in our teams. Otherwise, why do it? And so that's why it's easy to gloss over this third phase, is you can assume, okay, we're back. Let's move on. No, we've got to continue to support people in this third phase to make sure we, realize that ROI. So that's a little bit around, how to maybe tee up this third phase. Doug, additional thoughts and experiences on either the temptation to gloss over this third phase as a leader or, what's happening for people as they emerge into this phase.
Well, John, just probably just to say I emphatically agree with it's so easy to gloss over this this stage. And particularly if you're either the leader or part of the leadership that team that was responsible for initiating the change. And I've looking back on my career, I certainly can think of some times I was guilty of doing this. It's you're already looking towards the what's next. What's the next thing? And getting involved in that and just assuming that, we've got this bit of momentum going where it's feeling like this is starting to become part of our status quo, our normal. So now let's look somewhere else. I know for me, so many times you have so many things to do that the temptation can be looking at the what's next. So I think it's just a big watch out for. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I think there are some really fundamental leadership practices that you do in this phase. And I would agree with you. I think of the three, it's the easiest. And it can also be the time of celebration, recognition.
Absolutely.
And, one of the things that was on my mind in terms of leadership behaviors in this stage is to celebrate even small wins. And so, even in this new beginning stage where it's starting to normalize itself and returning to the status quo, it takes a hot minute to fully harvest and realize whatever the gain is that you're looking for from this change. And sometimes human nature is not to recognize the incremental progress and celebrate. That's like, if you're a parent and you have a child and they're trying to learn something new. Let's say they're pretty young and they now have a to-do list of making their bed every morning. And the expectation in this change, this new way of doing things, is your bed will be made every morning. And so there could be a temptation. They don't get their gold star, their ice cream cone, or whatever is exciting to them until they have a full week, 7 days in a row of doing that. And so, they go 2 days, make the bed, and then third day they don't. It can be tempting to focus on what didn't happen,
right?
As opposed to, what, the last 3 days, 2 out of 3 days, we're living our new our new normal here. This change. So I think the same thing holds true inside organizations. And I'm not saying that you don't have an expectation of excellence or whatever it is you're trying to realize from the change, but your celebration is also just for those even smaller wins. And to me, it communicates to people you're still paying attention. And this change still has meaning. You still believe in it. You haven't moved on to something else. But anyway, this can be a fun time just to find those moments of thanking people and celebrating it when things are starting to happen as you had hoped.
No, it's such an important point, and it's the pathway out of the middle phase into this third phase. What you're describing in terms of noticing and celebrating those milestones, that's how you help team members inch their way out, is celebrating those small wins, because it is so easy as a leader. And we've talked about this a little bit. I want to get more into this today. You're in a different place typically than your team is. And so as you're trying to help them transition into this third phase, it's very often the case you as the leader are already there. Your head is fully wrapped around this change. You've had a little more time with it. So you have that unfair advantage we always talk about. And so you're kind of there. You're already excited about it. You see it and you're trying to bring the team along. And to your point, Doug, it's very easy to, as a leader in this phase, await perfection to provide any praise at all. And so there's really a lesson in coaching leadership, which is, a big thing we need to have in our toolkit to support the whole change process. It's a key leadership style to make you successful in leading others through changes, coaching. But how often do we do that as leaders? We await perfection to provide any praise when, to your point, we're inching towards it. That's what's going to help us gain momentum if I can help you notice that. Furthermore, I think taking a couple steps back, if I can get you to identify what those milestones would be, what does progress look like to you in adopting this change? I think it really helps bring people along and move us past that status quo line fully into this third phase. So the term that's used by Pritchett in their research in terms of the communication style that's best suited for leaders in this third phase is inspiration. but it includes so many of the things we just mentioned, which are recognition, praise, those things we do to, support people's momentum. But to me, I love the word inspiration because it is absolutely human nature when we think about all three phases to communicate from where we're at and not where the other person is at. And so I know all of us, our listeners, you and I, Doug, have been in that position. Change is being announced, change is being launched, and the tone of the communication so oftentimes is so tone deaf in terms of where people in the organization are actually at. Well, it's this reality that we've talked about. Human nature is to communicate from where we're at, not the audience. And so if we're already excited about it, we already wrapped our head around it, we're in that third phase and we're speaking from a place of inspiration, and people are somewhere else in this change curve, that's where communication can fall flat. Now, what we're not suggesting is that you should hide your emotions in terms of how you feel about the change. If you're excited about it, don't hide from that. If you're worried about it, don't hide from that. There's an appropriate way to share all that with the team. But I think this is a time to manage your expectations of where the team is at and make sure that your communication, as much as possible, is about where they're at. Yep. And so it can be tempting, again, to provide inspiration all the way through the change curve, but it's only best suited in this kind of third and final phase. All right, Doug. So we mentioned, recognition. We mentioned praise. We mentioned the setting and support of milestones. What else comes to mind as we think about this idea of inspiring people and taking things far beyond that status quo line in terms of productivity and morale? What else has been true for you in your experiences that's helpful in this inspirational phase?
Yeah. So it's in some change initiatives, it's easier to do this than others, what I'm going to suggest. But I also think being able to talk about the impact of the change in quantifiable type of ways. And so hopefully when the idea of whatever this change initiative is, it was to address some maybe improvement on a situation. And there's all kinds of things that we can improve inside organizations, but typically there are metrics that are attached to those.
Yes.
So one of the things that can be really helpful in this stage from a leadership style in terms of not only how you're communicating, but what it is you're communicating. So I've seen organizations, and I've been involved in some of these, that they have a scoreboard, if you will, that's published in a number of different ways. Sometimes they're real-time scoreboards. I mean, operators can look out there and see how are we moving the needle, this week or this month or whatever it is. And so that's one of the other things to, I think, integrate into this. It's not the inspiration not only comes from the emotions and the way we communicate, but also the information that we're providing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just to make sure leaders are circling back, say, now, why did we do this in the first place? What were we hoping to improve? And what are the communication mechanisms that we have in place just to let people know how it's going? Now, John, I've also been involved in these change initiatives where maybe the data and the numbers aren't what we hope for. And so you've got to own that as well. This has to be full transparency because, maybe there's some tweaking that still needs to happen with an idea, even in the new beginnings stage. There are some ideas that get implemented and it doesn't have the impact that you'd hope to have. And so that's a whole different kind of conversation is recovery from that. So I would just remind leaders to always keep in mind, why did we do this? And as we get to this phase, how are we communicating throughout the organization? What kind of progress is being made as a result of the change?
Yeah. Yeah, another thing that I think about, a couple times through this series of change conversations you and I have had, we're really kind of comparing and contrasting the process side of change versus the people side of change. On the process side, in this phase, it can be tempting to, again, okay, we're done, move on to the next thing, because there's plenty of other changes happening simultaneously, concurrently within organizations. There's always a next thing to move on to. And so as a leader, you've got to kind of force yourself to have the discipline to slow down, stop, celebrate, this achievement, celebrate what the team has gone through. That's part of this inspiration that you need to provide people, is to kind of honor what they've gone through to get to where we're at, what we've achieved. And I love your idea of transparency, what we've achieved, where maybe we missed the mark. We didn't capitalize or get the full returns on what we've tried to implement. The other thing that has to happen in this phase is, I'll just call it a good lessons learned.
Yep.
What did we learn about ourselves, about how we manage change within our department, our team, or even the organization, from a project management sense and a process side? Good discipline to have, to stop and do sometimes what's called a postmortem. How did it go? What did we learn? Let's do an autopsy on the whole change process. And so having the discipline to do that, it's another reason for me, this third phase, when I mentioned it's so easily glossed over, it's that aspect oftentimes that's missed. We just move on to the next thing, and we never take the time to harvest the learnings of the overall experience we went through, both as human beings and from this project management process standpoint. And so we got to harvest all that, because that's how we really learn and become better at this whole thing of, deciding on implementing and adopting change. You want your organization to improve its capabilities in that area. And you want your people building their capacity to be able to handle change through these, I'll just call them opportunities that you have as change sets in. And it's another way for us on the receiving end of this, not just as leaders, but to be weary and a little bit cautious of turning yourself into a victim in this process. Again, change is not something that happens to you. It's something that if you choose to, you get to be a part of. And
Right.
This whole lessons learned debrief process is an important part of the third phase of inspirations.
Well, John, just to piggyback on that, you mentioned the process and the review process, and different organizations call it different things. One of my clients I've worked with for quite some time, and they had a lot of engineers inside their organization, and so they were really hardwired to think this way. They called them after action reviews.
Mm.
And what always impressed me about those after action reviews, that process itself was very regimented. And in fact, it was something that they taught new associates as they came into their organization. One, this is what happens anytime we do a project with a client, because they would sit down with their clients and actually do the after action reviews, and they had a process with just themselves as well. But I was always impressed by that. One, you never did a project without doing the review process. I mean, it was just expected.
Yep.
They documented the information so that others, it was a large national firm, could have access to those lessons learned. I thought, wow, when as an organization, there's many years ago, there was a book written about becoming a learning organization.
Yeah.
And that's part of that mentality of, how does what we learned in this, how could it be a benefit to others inside our organization as well? So they had a repository of these after action reviews that people could go read and say, hey, this is the kind of change that we're going to take on. What similar changes ever happened inside the organization? What were the lessons learned, and how could we benefit from it? Now, as I describe that, that's taking it to a very sophisticated level for their organization. It made sense due to the business that they were in. But there could be a variation of that for anyone that's listening to this, saying, how could we bring a little bit more discipline to that kind of review process, and how is that information memorialized, and how could we use it going forward?
Yeah. My mind goes back to our first conversation that kicked off this whole series of change episodes, where we really spent a lot of time on how difficult it can be sometimes in the organization to be thoughtful and choosy about the changes we take on, and the importance of prioritization, and being thoughtful of, what can the organization handle? What's our capacity? It's my belief that if you do some of these things well, and to your point, Doug, maybe you can't get, all the way as sophisticated as you just described, but if you're somewhere along, that continuum towards that, I think you'll find those initial conversations around choosing change, choosing which priorities, they start to become a lot easier
Yep.
because your organization is just getting better at one, the reality check of how good are we at change, what can we handle, but also what changes can we choose, which it just helps that process immensely if you're really good at this third phase and from a kind of project process standpoint alongside harvesting people's learnings, um, you know documenting, really looking at what did we learn about our organization, what went well,
Yep.
what do we need to do different next time. I think you'll find much easier conversations around choosing change going forward. The more you do that, it becomes very
Absolutely.
cyclical. So that's because the third phase is a bit easier than the first two. Those are kind of the key things to clue in
Yep.
on in that third phase. What I thought would be helpful now is maybe to zoom out and just in general, as we think about change leadership, some other just general best practices and approaches in no particular order, based on both of our experiences and our relationships with change theory that we've been exposed to. So I kind of mentioned a few minutes ago the coaching leadership style serves you really well throughout the change process, because one of the things I think about as a leader that's critical to helping your team navigate change is balancing accountability and empathy through this process. And you can find yourself as a leader sometimes trying to honor what people's emotions and reactions might be to change, but then using those statements that include the word "but." And so saying things to your team that sound like, I realize it's going to be tough, but we got to get it done by the 1st of May.
Yep.
I realize what it's going to take to put this all into play, but it's the expectation of the organization. And so I think most people know what the "but" in a sentence usually does. It just completely
Right.
disregards and erases. You might as well have not said the first part. And so we need to find a way in our communication and our style as a leader, using the coaching leadership style, to turn these into "and" statements as much as possible, accountability and empathy. And so I think you can very easily flip around some of those statements. Hey, this is the expectation. By May 1st, we're expected to be at this point. And you're kind of describing, where we need to arrive in that third phase. And I'm very appreciative of what it's going to take to get there. And I'm very interested in what ideas you have on how we can work together to get to that point. And so just a simple nuance of flipping around an idea or a statement is a way that you can start to honor this balance between accountability and empathy. It's like we're going there. We got to get to that point, and I'm going to be as empathic and supportive as possible on the journey required to get there. So, any thoughts on coaching or this balance between accountability and empathy that can serve us well, during change?
Oh, I love. I'm glad you brought into the conversation the "but" as opposed to the "and." As a side note, I just think that's a huge um, communication pattern to develop in relationships with folks. And I know, even though I'm aware of it, I still do it this day at times. So thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, empathy and change. Now we're kind of stepping back and looking at change, kind of overarching themes is huge. It's absolutely huge. In any of these three phases, we have to keep that in mind, that when you're making changes, it's having an impact on people. We're living in times right now where that is front and center
Yeah.
in the national headlines.
Yep.
And again, as we've talked before, this is not a political conversation, but it's just a noticing of events that are going on right now. And I think some of the criticism that's out there is a lot of change being introduced very quickly on a national basis. But I think some of the pushback of what we're hearing now is that lack of apparent empathy in the impact that it has on folks. So um, I think it's just really critical. John, the other thing that I was thinking about, just kind of global themes with change, is for leaders to develop the mindset that change is the norm.
Yes.
And so I think organizations thrive. I suppose there's some organizations out there that they're not experiencing a lot of change. It's hard to pick those out anymore. I mean, just
Yeah.
the competitive landscape, just the world that we live in. I think they're fewer and far between where the status quo, year after year after year is going to serve you well. Even small mom and pop organizations that operate that way are just they typically aren't successful. And so I think the reason that's important is, if you picture a leader coming into a meeting and they're wringing his or her hands, they're like, oh my gosh, this is, as opposed to embracing, here is the next, I'm going to go over the top here with my language. Here's this next wonderful change that we get to implement. And so that you're doing change well inside your organization when change is announced, that there's a sense of anticipation and excitement because you've had such a strong track record, doing it in the past, and that people have a full realization that change is absolutely necessary in order for us not just to thrive, but to survive. And so I would just encourage leaders to be aware of the language they use, their body language, their interaction, their energy around change, that and embrace it, even though it's hard. Our conversations have really been around some of the challenges of change and the pit of despair and the different things that we've talked about. But it's creating that mindset and that energy around it's good. It's good. In fact, maybe you get to the point where team members who at your organization start to get a little nervous if change hasn't happened in a while. It's like,
are we getting stale?
Yeah. Are we getting stale? And boy, if you can start to develop an organization from the bottom up, that they're kind of pushing on it, saying, hey, wait a second, here's what I'm noticing. This is an area that we really ought to consider then, you're starting to really create an organization that embraces what it is we've been talking about and finds the value in change.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that is tempting to do as a leader, you and I have talked a lot, both in podcast episodes and offline and just conversations over the years, the need for leaders to constantly be mindful of gaps between intention and perception. And change is one of those times where the best of intentions as a leader can really send you sideways with your team. And so I know my temptation over the years when change is coming fast and furious is to wake up in the morning with the good intent of, I want to protect my team from what may feel helter-skelter. And I'll be honest, I mean, that's drawn me to do some things from a place of good intent where I'm actually making promises I can't keep. And so you may find yourself sometimes, if change is coming, fast and furious for your team, and for whatever reason, you and your team's capacity is not at a great level to handle all that. I can remember myself saying something like, hey, May 1st gets here, don't worry, it's all going to calm down.
Yeah.
and the good intent there is I want to protect you. But then what happens, after May 1st? There's 10 other new things that we're going to need to, figure out how to implement change-wise. And so it's constantly managing, again, that gap between intention and perception, and making promises we know we can honor and keep. And so it's interesting. Pritchett actually talks about a few guarantees that whether you know what change we're talking about or not, you should just start making these guarantees to your team. And one of those is, hey, team, change isn't going away. It's only going to come faster. And so you might ask yourself as a leader, why might you be afraid to communicate that way to your team? It's like, well, I'm going to scare them off. And it's like, well, that's placing a heck of a limiting belief on the people you lead. I think if you make a promise you can keep by saying something to them like that, hey, this is going to move fast, and I want to work with you on building our capacity as a team to be able to handle this fast and furious, pace of changes coming at us. But I'm here to promise you, I don't even know what the next changes might be, but they're coming, and we got to be ready for those. And what your team will appreciate is just the honesty in that, and probably the opportunity for them to be involved with solutioning for that and being part of the plan to build capacity to be able to handle that. So something to be mindful of here when you think about the coaching leadership style. I think in a moment it'd be helpful to talk about visionary leadership, its role in change leadership, but certainly again being very mindful. What am I tempted to do that might not actually serve me well with my team? And so it's a big aspect of effective change leadership. Promises I can keep. Being mindful. I intend this, but how's that actually going to land on people?
John, another broad theme idea that I had jotted down is I mentioned before, you're really handling change well as an organization culturally when you get kind of that bottoms up approach, even change coming from team members. One of the opportunities that I think is missed sometimes is when you hire new people onto your team. Depending on what industry you're in, where you're pulling people from, I, one of the mistakes that I made in my leadership career is believing that when I hire somebody new onto my team, there's this learning curve that they need to go through, and they really aren't of full value to me until 6, 8 months into the job, a year, whatever it takes to learn the job that they're doing there. But what they can provide you day one is fresh eyes and fresh perspective. And I use parenting analogies quite a bit. As a parent, when you have young kids, one of those times in life that can get really challenging as a parent is when you ask them to do something and they go, "Why?
Yeah.
Why are we doing?" And so new people will come in and they'll see what's going on in your organization. Go, "I wonder why they do it that way." And so, John, when you think about change, is to be very mindful of who are you inviting into that process? Who are you having conversations with? And don't overlook the newest of your team members that have a fresh perspective that they're going to lose quickly. After they've worked inside your organization for 6 months to a year, now they've been culturalized, if that's the appropriate term, to see things the way that we've always done it here. So it's a small thing, but it can be a big thing. Really lean into the new perspectives that are available to you as a leader in the organization, because they're going to see some things that maybe you've seen every single day, but you've just grown blind to it.
Yes.
But they come in and notice something that's doesn't make sense to them, or from a competitive standpoint is very limiting. So I just offer that up as well. It can be a real huge opportunity if we're mindful enough to take advantage of it.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Talking again about the promises we make as leaders, and maybe flipping some of those around, making promises we can keep. Not promising that this is the best thing since sliced bread. It's really easy when you're already in that third phase as the leader and wanting to inspire people and get them really excited about what's coming, to promise things that, about the change that just aren't true. And so one of the things you and I mentioned a few times is, change is typically, not the earth-shattering 180-degree shift of an organization. It's modest improvements that we're making over the course of time to go from, level 2 up to level 3. We're not going from level 2 to level 10 in one foul swoop. And so one of the other guarantees you might think about making as a leader is this change is coming up is not going to be trouble-free. And yes, we've tested it. Yes, we've, tried to figure out some of the kinks, but we're counting on you to help us see around corners here. And so your notion of the value that new team members, coming with an outside perspective can add, they can help you see around corners, help you anticipate what some of those challenges might be. And I think balance out, if you're imagining you're having a conversation with your entire team and you've got a good mix of tenure there, what a healthy conversation you might be able to have around what are the challenges and what are the opportunities. Let's have a good kind of balanced, get all the cards on the table type conversation here to, make sure we're giving ourselves a reality check. Yeah. It's not the worst thing that's ever happened to us. It's not going to ruin us, ruin the organization. And it's also not the best thing since sliced bread. This is about a modest improvement. And what can we do as a team, again, to see around corners? Because here's some of the challenges we've already faced in the testing and implementation of this. But team, I'm counting on you to help us identify things we haven't thought about. And I can guarantee you there's going to be a few places we bump our head that I haven't even been able to figure out yet.
Yep.
And so that level of kind of transparency, vulnerability, another thing to do to, serve you well as a leader during change. And I love your point around, probably a way to successfully engage some newer voices, newer perspectives on the team.
Yep.
So maybe staying on this theme of promises and guarantees, a third one, and we've pretty much alluded to this, but is, it's very easy to believe as a member of the team, again, to get into this, I'll just call it the victim mindset. Hey, change is being done to me. It's very common for people who feel that way to disempower themselves. This was not my idea. This is not my plan. I'm going to move over here to the sidelines and we'll see how this works. We'll see if it works. And you can imagine a member of your team kind of, disarming themselves, folding their arms, and just kind of watching the show. And so one guarantee that you can also make to your team is, by the way, this won't work without you. It's not someone else's baby, as we've said before. This is everybody's plan now. We've decided to do this as an organization. And I am darn curious around where you're experiencing issues and resistance. I want to help you with that. And I'm going to commit and guarantee to you right now, this won't work without you. This won't work without your buy-in. And I think we said that in our very first conversation, where change goes sideways, it usually has little or nothing to do with how good the idea was, everything to do with the level of buy-in we're able to generate throughout the team. So on an individual level, it's important to appreciate that. I can't move to the sidelines. I can't fold my arms. This won't work without me. Well, that's a guarantee as a leader you need to be making to people. Yeah. It's almost like, Doug, if you're on my team, you're going to move over to the sidelines because you think this won't work. Guess what? You're right. Because the act of you moving to the sidelines is part of what will make this go sideways. And so we need you. The success of this depends on each person. And it's very easy to not appreciate that, because again, one approach is, oh, this is their idea. We'll see if it works. I didn't come up with this, not my baby type thing. It's also very easy, maybe in a larger organization, to believe, well, this is happening over there. This doesn't impact me. I can get up in the morning, keep doing my job like I've always done. And it's like, well, no, I probably need to be asking some questions around, hey, is there anything I could be thinking about before this gets, this permeates the rest of the organization? And so getting activated on that would require my leader reminding me, hey, we need you. Even if we haven't figured it out yet, the success of this will depend on you. So, another guarantee there that's really important to make. So I mentioned this earlier, one other style of leadership that can serve you extremely well, certainly coaching, but visionary. The visionary leadership style in terms of your ability as a leader to paint a compelling picture of where this change is intended to take us. And then the vulnerable side of visionary is to enroll the team in those discussions around, do we see the same thing here? Let me get your reaction to the place I believe this change will take us. What ideas do you have on what will get us there? That enrollment, again, of the team in help authoring where this is headed can be critical. And so that's one version of visionary leadership. The other one that kind of comes to mind that I've seen serve leaders well in the change leadership process, if you will, is the power of storytelling. I think it can be so effective. And I know you're a big fan of storytelling. You and I have done some work over the years trying to help leaders think about, consider, and maybe even become better storytellers. I'll just say honestly, I think you're a fantastic storyteller, and it serves you well. And so in a change sense, I think one of the things I appreciate most about storytelling when I've been on the receiving end during times of heavy change is I feel like storytelling done well, it provides the person an opportunity to make up their mind for themselves. They're not being commanded or directed to think a certain way. A story can be a way to share a perspective for someone to consider.
Yep.
And consider it in a very compelling way. But ultimately, I always feel like when it's done well, I'm left to still kind of make my own decisions about how I feel about things. Thoughts from you, Doug, on storytelling and its impact on change leadership?
Well, it is huge. I would agree with that. And when leaders share stories, and let's just keep it within the context of a change going inside an organization, stories tend to be about not only the experience somebody had, but the impact that it had on them. It touches people at a deeper level. And I think, John, what's so powerful about storytelling is not just the story that the individual is sharing with others, but the relatability that people have to that story. So when I hear somebody's story, it's their own unique journey in life. Now, every once in a while, you'll hear a story and go, oh my gosh, I've lived that almost exactly. But more times than not, I think what good storytelling does is it stirs something up inside of people to say, how do I connect to that? And what impact did it have on me? And so, as you're talking about that, it's like I've heard leaders talk about an experience that they've had, say, from a consumer standpoint, of just how great the experience was. And, you could tick off the list of organizations that are so well known for the customer experience and the impact that that has on them. Now, leaders will tell a story about that kind of experience that's not even close to being in the same industry that they're in. But the intent of the story is for people to think about, yeah, when I've been treated as a customer this way, when I've had this kind of impact or received this kind of support or help, or whatever is involved in that story, it can naturally lead them to say, how do we create those kind of experiences for the customers that we serve? What can we do to turn our customers into these apostles, if you will, that are out there talking about our organization in such glowing terms, and the pride that comes with being affiliated with an organization that does that. And so I think sometimes when people think about sharing stories, they're fairly limited in what they think they can share in terms of the story. So if I'm initiating some kind of change inside my organization, it's like, let's see, 10 years ago, I did something kind of like this change. I'll tell the story of that. Is think broader and deeper about your experiences and the stories that can come from that and how that's going to connect and inspire folks. And then once you do that, then it gives you this really cool platform to be able to tie in. And this change that we're talking about here is intended to help us realize that kind of impact for our customers, or that kind of emotional, or whatever is involved in the change. So it's I as you said before, you and I are big fans of storytelling and the impact it has. And by the way, when you say visionary leadership in doing this, also know that this isn't just reserved for the CEOs of the world.
Right.
This is for any leader inside an organization that just needs to connect with people and motivate and inspire folks. And so this isn't just for the C-suite folks. This is for anybody it's from where they sit in the organization, is trying to inspire and get people going in a certain direction. So it's, John, maybe that's another topic for another day, is for one of our conversations, is the power of storytelling. Because when it's done well, I think it's one of the most impactful tools a leader can have in his or her toolbox, for sure.
Yeah. Probably a final benefit that comes to mind that I think applies really well to effective change leadership is when a leader is good at telling stories, it can really humanize them, because there's an element of vulnerability that typically shows up in a good story, because it's something that you experienced, how it affected you. Because when you're trying to manage change with your team and lead them through this very human experience, again, we've used this term before, but you can find yourself kind of selling change. And to your team, sometimes I've had experiences where it can appear robotic. It's like, do you have feelings? Do you not care about how this happened? Does this not affect you? Well, storytelling can be a powerful way to break through all that and provide direct evidence to your team. No, this is affecting this person. They are human. They are appreciative of the emotions that are potentially tied to what we're trying to take on here. So, yeah,
Yes.
big fan of storytelling, and I think you're right. Could be fodder for a whole other conversation. So other communication, and we're just kind of popcorn jumping around here at a broad level. Other communication techniques as a leader that can be effective. Another thing that comes to mind is we've mentioned resistance as a very natural part of the change process. And I think the first thing you have to manage within yourself as a leader when you're communicating to your team is noticing the reaction you're getting from people as you share things about the change. Well, I don't know about our listeners, but I know for me, it's very easy to have a visceral reaction when I share something, a change that I'm excited about, and the reaction I get is pushback, resistance. It can kind of take the wind out of your sails. And try as I might, know as much as I do about change leadership, it's so easy to have that kind of let down or visceral reaction as a leader when you encounter that pushback from the team. And so I want to get into a little bit here for a few minutes, the different types of resistance and maybe how to handle those. But first of all, we just have to appreciate as leaders, resistance is such a natural part of change. It's going to happen. And in fact, you ought to be concerned as a leader if you don't encounter resistance.
Yep.
And so you almost need to imagine you're having let's say a team meeting. You got your whole group there, and you're sharing with them a change that in your mind is going to impact their world. So I want you to imagine you're announcing that change, and instead of resistance, what you get is no reaction. Literally crickets. No one says anything. I don't know about you. I'd be deeply concerned about my team's level of engagement in the work in general. And so you almost need to embrace change. And this is a way for me over the years has been healthy to get over the potential visceral reaction to resistance, is to see resistance as a powerful gauge of engagement. And in fact, the more that someone pushes back, the more that it could be strong evidence of engagement. Because at its core, you have to ask yourself, well, why would someone push back? Why would someone dig their heels in and say, no, I don't want to do this? Well, at the very core of it, it's because they care. I care about the way it was done before.
Right.
I care about, what my understanding was of the way the job and the work was before this change. And so I wouldn't push back unless I deeply cared. And the more maybe passionate or excitable I am in that resistance, the more evidence it is that I really care about this place and I care about the work that we're trying to accomplish. And I care about the impact that this change may have on all that. And so it's natural, but unchecked, unmanaged, unwelcomed. If you shut it down and you don't make it okay to, resist, it can be lethal to your team and honestly lethal to an organization. And so the resistance piece at a top level, really important aspect of change to embrace. So before we get into the levels, Doug, I want to hear.
Yeah, I agree with you. It would be highly alarming and concerning if a leader isn't getting some degree of resistance. Now, my experience has been high functioning teams where there's high levels of trust. You're going to get the pushback and the resistance. But if that's not where your team is, then sometimes you need to think about ways to get that conversation started in a way that gives people permission. And I haven't thought about this in forever. It's a technique that I used in an organization where I was hired as part of the senior leadership team in an organization. They never hired an outsider to be in the position that I was in this organization. So already I knew I was coming in with some hesitation and reservation on the parts of individuals on my team, because they're like, who is this guy who's never worked in this industry to come in and be able to help us do anything better? And so the idea I came up with actually worked out pretty well. I was aware of some pretty significant changes that we're going to have in our business model. And so the task that I gave them is, and I think it was like a half a day meeting, and we came in and I caught them by surprise. I named our primary competitor in this industry. I said, you are now our primary competitor, and your task over the next, I gave them, I think, 90 minutes, is I want you to come up with ways to put the company we actually work for out of business.
Oh, wow.
And that's all I told them. I said, I'm going to leave, talk amongst yourselves, and then I'm going to come in, and your deliverable for me is for you to tell me, as our primary competitor, how you're going to put us out of business. And I purposely left the room because I didn't want my presence to have any kind of impact. And John, I will never forget, I came in, there were flip chart pages all over the wall and just pictures of things, and just a palpable higher level of energy in the room. And they found that exercise to be absolutely fascinating because it gave them a way to criticize the organization in a non-threatening way.
That's fantastic.
If that makes it all sense. And what stemmed from that, and to this day, I can still even remember some of the specifics, some of the ways they thought that we were vulnerable as an organization, if they worked for the competitor, what they would do to attack those vulnerabilities, had to do with the changes that I knew we were about to introduce as an organization. And so what happened is my role wasn't to have the expertise and the knowledge to tell them what to do. They were the experts on the business. I just arrived, and I would never be at their level of expertise, but to help facilitate their own discovery and ways to express our vulnerabilities. And it's not to say that the changes that we put in place went flawlessly and there weren't some issues. But I think for at least the organization that I was responsible for, just that very exercise just created the space for them to consider changes that maybe they wouldn't have considered before, or at least as readily considered. Because, John, I documented what they came up with, and when those changes were introduced, referred back to just their brilliance.
Yeah.
And they'd already identified what those vulnerabilities were. And you know what? The senior team here agrees with you. They see those same vulnerabilities, and here's the data, and this is why we're doing these. So, you know, the old expression, lead from wherever you are with your team. High trust teams are going to open up. They're going to express a different point of view. There's going to be that resistance, but sometimes you got to get a little bit creative as a leader and say, what do we need to do to at least get the conversation started?
Yes.
So that when people are in disagreement, they have resistance, they're going to feel much more comfortable bringing it to the table, and it will be valued.
Love that example. What a great story. And sounds like it's pretty powerful for your team to have the opportunity to do that, and extremely valuable to the organization to have those, those insights. Wow. Another thing to think about is you're helping the team understand why, which is a way for them to process their own resistance. Is simply, and we can forget to do this as leaders and organizations, put change in context and really help people understand why there is a need for change. And your story's somewhat an example of that. Let's talk about our vulnerabilities, and then it becomes clear. Yeah, if we don't change this, a competitor will wipe us out. So it's clear. Another way to put change in context is your team is likely way more astute and aware than you might think they are in terms of what's going on around the organization. And so a helpful exercise is kind of right out of the Pritchett playbook, but I've seen teams do it just kind of on their own to put change in context, is to have a team think about, maybe even brainstorm, certainly, what are all the significant changes in the last 12 months within this organization? And, you need to put a time limit on it, because if you give them a flip chart, they could probably, fill up an entire wall of things that organizations maybe have done in the last 12 months. But you want to make a second list. And the second list would be, what are all the most significant changes of note to us as an organization that have happened maybe within our industry? So kind of around our organization. And again, you got to cut the conversation off, because they could probably brainstorm all day on that list. And then as a third list, what are all the most significant things of note within the world?
Yeah.
And so you get people talking about, the political landscape, the stock market, trends, fads, everything under the sun that's going on that could have an impact on the industry and the organization. And it becomes so clear so quickly to the team of the need for change because you see what's going on around us.
Yep.
And so another real common myth inside organizations is if you were to ask, your everyday, common person on the team, where does change come from? Their answer would probably sound something like, well, the CEO did it to us. The CEO woke up one day and decided, I want to make your life harder. And so what an exercise like yours or like this idea of brainstorming industry, world, and inside organization can do is help people understand there are forces at play that we have zero control over, zero influence over, that we are forced to come to terms with. And it becomes pretty obvious we can't ignore those because everybody can name, 5, 10 organizations who chose to, kind of ostrich, put their head in the sand and just avoid what's going on around them. And those organizations don't make it. And so it becomes very clear, not just the need for change, but even the context for why this particular change makes sense. And the other thing that becomes clear, you brainstorm what's going on around us. It's one thing to say we have to react to that. Well, what if we want to think in terms of what's it like to get ahead of that? What's it like to really live into our mission as an organization? Where our mission as an organization is not to be in reactionary mode to the forces around us. We want to be a force for change ourselves. And so it helps members of the team who are experiencing resistance understand where is this change coming from, which can be critical in their path to acceptance. And so a couple good tactics that I think at a top level to get resistance out in the open, make it okay, and help people start to come to terms with it. Now, the other thing that can be very helpful or instructive about resistance, one, we said it's a great sign of people's passion and engagement in their work and in the organization. Resistance, in terms of what flavor of resistance am I getting from people, can also be very instructive in terms of where people might be in the 3 stages of the change curve. And so really at a top level, what the research would tell you is pushback or resistance is usually coming from one of 4 places. And so at a very simple base layer, people will push back because they don't know. I don't know. I'm pushing back because I'm not sure. What are we doing? When's this start? I have a lot of questions. Well, so you might ask yourself, based on what we've talked about so far in prior episodes, what clues would that provide you in terms of where they're at in the change curve? Well, they're probably in the first phase. They don't have enough information yet. No. They're still in endings. They're still coming to terms of what's going away, what's starting. And so information is the best thing that can solve for that particular level of resistance. And as I list these off for our listeners, the higher we go up, the deeper into the list, the more acute and problematic it gets. Okay, I need information. That's pretty easy. Let me get you the facts. Let me get you everything I know. Next level up is I can't do it. And that's typically evidence of someone who's struggling in that middle phase. They're in that potential pit of despair. They're really stuck in the mud in terms of their understanding of how they could take on this change. And so I can't do it is solved by support and potentially development, training, and resources. Sometimes it's a calibration on expectations too, because people can very easily lead themselves to believe for one reason or another, I don't think I can do this. And so simply a conversation around your beliefs in them. I think you can. Here's what I've seen from you that's evidence that I think we can overcome this. And here's some of the training and resources I think we can provide you. Helpful ways to get people over that second level of resistance, which is, I can't do it. All right, so we'll go up one more rung here. There's 4 total. The third one, starting to get more problematic. I don't care is a reason that people will push back. And what you have to ask yourself in those circumstances are, what am I doing to help manage their priorities, to ultimately hold them accountable to this particular change? Because I don't care usually emanates from, I don't think I need to do anything about this change. I think this is happening over there. I can continue doing my job like I've always done. And so earlier when we talked about that guarantee you can make to people, hey, I guarantee you this isn't going to work without your support, without your effort. This is part of what's feeding into this kind of third level of resistance. I don't care. And so the solution here is to make sure people feel held accountable to this and they really are appreciative and understanding of their role in its success. And so let me describe a quick example of how this gets undermined in organizations. People's experiences, despite what we say, despite what happens at the town hall or what gets disseminated through communication channels and memos and all that, it's people's experiences that shape their beliefs around, what's true inside an organization, what our culture's about, what the expectations are. And so if people's experience has been, we keep having these quarterly meetings where we announce 4 or 5 new changes that are coming and we're asked to get excited about it. But our experience has been consistently over years and years that when we get back to our desks from that town hall or that team meeting where we talk about the 4 or 5 new changes, that our original list of priorities have not changed. And in fact, my performance review, let's say, has never included any of the changes. It's only been the same 10 things I'm being held accountable to. It's almost as if by way of our systems and processes, we're telling people not to adopt the change. And so it's just a quick example of how easily this third level of resistance comes into play, is if people's experience is you don't actually put any oomph behind your ask. You want me to just take on this extra thing and take it at, face value, get excited about it just because. But if at the end of the day, you're not really holding me accountable to it, we haven't really had conversations around how this should fit into my priorities, maybe even which priorities should come off to, take their place. No wonder I don't care about it. You've basically told me not to by way of my experience. And so just one example, but Doug, reactions to that or other examples of how you see people arriving at this third tier of resistance? I don't really care to do it.
Well, it's what was standing out to me, John, as I was considering the I don't care level of resistance, is people not feeling connected to the impact that the change is going to have. And I'm struggling to come up with a way to describe this. I just, my mind can't help but go through my own experiences dealing with change, and particularly when you don't get that buy-in across the organization. I mean, it's almost like a collective organizational I don't care.
Yeah.
Is leaders not doing a very good job of maybe a couple things. One is helping connect the dots between the change and the person's role in helping that change be successful. So there can be that element. The other thing too, and not that you know me well enough that I believe that people do things for all kinds of reasons. I think a component of it, and varies by individual, is just even incentives and rewards for helping make something happen.
Yeah.
So I have seen organizations, and the reality is I've probably been involved in a few of these, where when the change is talked about, and I mentioned before the metrics that you need to have in sight to gauge the effectiveness of the change. Well, when people can't relate to those metrics in any kind of meaningful way, or appreciate awards in any, like I've been in senior management in a couple, publicly held companies. So there's always pressure on, EPS and what the analysts are looking for. And I have seen that PowerPoint presentation when change initiatives are announced, to use language and terms around the stock price, and this is going to be accretive to our earnings. I mean, using jargon and language that for a lot of people, unless you live in that world all the time, it's just, you might as well be speaking Greek, assuming you don't speak Greek. So it's, how do you speak language? How do you help people understand their connection to what it is? And once we can be successful in doing that, the odds are raised that you're going to start to maybe not totally eliminate, but greatly reduce this feeling of I don't care, because I don't have connection to it. I don't see how I impact it. I don't have clear line of sight between what it is I do every day and my role. To your point, here's what I'm being held accountable to on my performance review. None of this is related to this. So I think we get sloppy sometimes as leaders, and we get frustrated that we're getting an I don't care reaction. But the reality is, if you step back, the leadership that people are receiving is creating a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so those might just be some watch out fors. If you have it on a large scale in your organization, or even with certain individuals, is just to double click on that a bit and understand what's their level of connection to this idea, their understanding of it, and their role in helping make it happen. So I think it's a great great insight, and something we as leaders probably in general need to pay more attention to.
Yeah. Well, and so you talk about the quality of leadership people are receiving. That, it's a great transition into this fourth and probably most problematic level of resistance that you can experience from people, which is I'm resisting because I don't believe.
Hmm.
And so it's one thing to not care. It's like, this is happening over there, and maybe I'm not as connected to it. But your idea of really connecting people to the purpose behind it also feeds into this I don't believe. And so if you haven't done that, that can be a huge problem for people. And so the solution to I don't believe is basically, it's simply the quality of leadership that I'm receiving.
Yep.
And one of the things that's all too common, and this is only one contributor to this I don't believe that I've seen happen, because there's several, would be, you as a leader, maybe yourself, were not very accepting of this particular change. You're not excited about it. You don't think it's going to work. It wasn't your idea. It was kind of passed on to you. To take that a step further, maybe you weren't given a lot of time to sit with it before you had to turn around and announce it and start managing your team through it. There can be this kind of hands-off approach as a leader with your team to say, I don't know. I don't have any answers for you. We'll see how it goes. So, we talked earlier around the member of the team folding their arms and moving to the sideline. This would now be the leader folding their arms and kind of disempowering themselves and saying, well, I didn't author this change, thus I'm not the leader of this change. And so I'm going to kind of step away from my leadership responsibility as it relates to this change, which is a huge mistake.
Oh, yeah.
Because as we've talked about before, you can't place the dependency on people, your team's buy-in on change, on the CEO, on the executive team, on the communications department or the project management team, the resources that are committed to this particular change initiative. That's not fair to them. They don't deal with your team member on a day-to-day basis. And as we've talked about so many times, people's environment, 70, 80% of it is shaped by you as the leader. Even if it's a change that had nothing to do with you, wasn't your idea, you still own the experience of your team navigating through that. And they're looking to you for that. And so one of the ways, in terms of resistance, is really easy to get there is when my leader has basically backed away from the table, moved to the sidelines and said, I don't know, not my baby, their baby, go ask them. And it's just it's a terrible approach as a leader, but it's a reason that people arrive at this more acute problematic level of resistance, which is, I'm not going to do this because I don't believe in what we're doing. So tough place to be. I think some of the answers to that are in your example, that can serve I don't care and I don't believe, which is to connect people to it. But some other things that come to mind as you think about this top most problematic level, I don't believe in what we're doing.
Well, I so this is well, this can exist throughout the organization. Certainly, what I'm about to describe is problematic at more senior levels of leadership. But I don't believe. Sometimes the reason people don't believe is due to leadership's track record.
Yeah.
And that's a tough one. And I've been involved in some of those situations more actually as a consultant than my own career. But you talk about change inside organization. Sometimes it doesn't work. And people get that. And depending on how that failure is handled, that has an awful lot to do with trust and credibility going forward. But when people just see change after change after change and doesn't work,
Yeah.
you can have all the great change processes in the world if people have lost belief in their leader. I mean, to use you and I are big sports guys. When you've lost the locker room,
Yeah.
the new playbook or the new training technique or even changing out the offensive coordinator, when the head coach is like, ain't going to work.
Yeah.
And so it's organizationally this notion of whoever's making those decisions has to be smart enough to understand that the reason we're not being successful, the reason the non-believers exist. I'm thinking of Ted Lasso right now and the belief sign above the door and getting shredded. When people have lost their belief in leadership, I don't care how well you do the change and what your intentions are. It's time to make a change. And those are really tough calls. I don't say that lightly. But sometimes it's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know what you do with that. If you're listening to this and like, well, I'm
thanks a lot,
not
guys.
in a position to make the change in the leadership. Well, but you are in a position to own your own performance.
Yep.
And your ability to be. So just know, any leader, whether you're a frontline leader or the CEO of an organization, you only get a number of times to do this before people will lose their belief in you as a leader.
Yeah.
And what's unfortunate is if you have 4, catastrophes related to change in a row, and you've lost your locker room, and now the 5th one comes along, and this really is the change that's going to turn things around. To your point, even though it's a great idea and the quality of it is fantastic, if you lost the belief of your people, it's going to be really hard to get through that. So don't ever lose sight of that. And that's a tough one to look in the mirror and really understand, where am I in terms of the belief that people have in me as a leader. But it's a really important question to always be asking yourself.
Yeah, this just kind of popped in my head, but maybe this idea of being so mindful of the potential for losing the locker room, and that each change experience that my team goes through with me at the helm, me as the person they're counting on, at least 70-80% in terms of their environment, that's what I'm up against. I'm either reinforcing and instilling the right beliefs, from them and me as a leader, and probably in the organization as a whole, or have the potential to lose that.
Yep.
And so it's kind of seeing each little change maybe as, the stakes are pretty high potentially.
Absolutely.
And the experience I shape or help shape for them through this change process that we're going through is going to add to or potentially take away from that ultimate level of belief. And I had not thought about it that way until, we talked about this notion. I love it of the potential for losing the locker room.
I've known leaders over the years, and you could certainly name some on a national spotlight basis, but even in my own experience, very capable folks, and they went through a tough learning curve inside organization X, and they did lose their locker room and the belief that people had in their change. And then either on their own accord or they were forced to leave, they go to another organization and they're highly successful. And so, as part of the our development and growth as leaders is, I cringe to think about my early years of leadership and just mistakes that I made, and almost to the point I wish I could go back in time and apologize to some people because it was just bad. And not that I was perfect at the end of my career, but I learned a lot. And I took those leadership lessons that I learned from organization to organization to organization. So you just know that sometimes you do get to the point where you're just not going to be as successful as you need to be in change, and you need that fresh start. Your team needs a new leader to come in, and sometimes you're going to need to go somewhere else. And just know, if you've had that struggle as a leader, that that's not your forever status and brand as a leader. But you got to take those experiences, be smart with them. What are you learning about yourself as you move to that next opportunity? Just how can I be more effective in helping bring about change in my organization? For sure.
Yeah. Well, maybe as a last area of just, again, top level guidance, tips and tricks for our listeners on change leadership, for me would be related to, we talked about how change pretty much 100% of the time will bring distraction. It'll pull people away from their everyday work. And part of what causes, as we think again about this idea of the change curve, part of what causes a dip or a decline in productivity and performance oftentimes is distraction. People getting pulled away from their understanding of what the everyday job is. And the challenge in change leadership is, left unchecked, all of a sudden one change over here starts to impact other things down the line that it shouldn't have originally impacted. And so there's a need for you as a leader to maintain focus, keep the team, pointed in the right direction, keep them focused on the things that they're doing that contribute to the overall mission of the organization. And so even in that informational phase of endings, letting people know, here's what's going away, here's what hasn't changed at all that needs to remain a priority. Talking about those things can be arguably as important as anything else, because there can be this just stall out reaction that people have. Okay, wait, stop, pump the brakes. And it's like, well, hold on a second. There are some aspects that should not be impacted at all that we actually need you to double down on, maintain focus on, while we figure out, together how to adopt this new thing. These are the things that can't stop. We have to continue. And so one of the things I'll just quickly point to that can help you think about maybe managing or at least mitigating distractions is where people will place their focus. And what is so often the case in times of change is people will place their focus, if you let them, usually on things they don't control. Because when change is setting in, there's communication flying around, and we don't have all the facts, all the information. And those facts and information, the headlines are changing day to day sometimes. It can lead to more questions than answers, and lead people to get some anxiety sometimes, become worried, become consumed with things they absolutely have no control over. And so, then the question is, how do I get people focused on what they do have control over? And that's a tough thing to do as a leader, is to say, I realize we've got a ton of questions here. I realize we're worried about some things that I can't even give you an answer on yet. How can I help you temporarily set that aside so that it's not standing in the way of the things that we actually need to continue to do? That's really challenging. But Doug, I want to hear your reaction. But before that, one place you can start that I think is interesting is, no matter the change and no matter the circumstances related to the change, no matter how much about the change you and your team don't control, there's typically a pretty similar list of things you always have control over, no matter what's going on. And that at a minimum, it's a place you can start with your team to gain some focus and even gain some traction and momentum in terms of their contributions. And so it's a short list, but we control how we react to this.
Right.
That's one thing we can start with. It's happening, right? We don't control that necessarily, but we do control how we react to this. We also have control over who we go communicate with related to this. Who are we going to go ask questions? Who do we need information from? What's that whole process going to look like? Not only do we control our emotional reaction, we control our actions. What are we going to do and not do as a result of this change? There's a few other things, but that's just kind of a starting point at a minimum, no matter what's happening change wise to you and your team. Starting with a list of things we do have control over is a way to get people kind of re engaged, reactivated. And honestly, what I've noticed is once they get activated on that short list, it's interesting. The list of things they end up having control over starts to increase because they've activated themselves. So, Doug, again, I'll kick it over to you, but experiences with this potential for distraction and this consumption, sometimes this anxiety related to things we don't have control over.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Absolutely. Couple thoughts. As you're describing that, John, it's an element of our behavior and what we control, and then also what we can control in terms of where our time and energy is being devoted.
Yes.
And so, I haven't thought about this book in a long. It's an old book, and it was a big part of a culture of an organization I worked in, and it's called the Oz Principle.
Oh yeah.
And it was a book that was required reading by our CEO of all new associates that got their own copy. And he was inclined. He'd meet somebody in the hall. If he didn't know the person, if he'd not met him, he would ask names and get to know them. And he would ask about the book. But one of the concepts in the Oz Principle is, I'm going to get the language wrong. It's been a long time since I read it. Is below the line thinking, I think, is what it was called.
Yep.
And so culturally, what we would practice from that book, and it was language that we're all comfortable calling each other on. Didn't matter what your job title was or the person you're calling on. It could be somebody very senior to you. But if you hear their language that gets into things that they can't control, that's below the line conversation.
Yep.
Above the line action and thinking is, okay, here's this issue of concern. Above the line is, what can I do about it? Yeah. How can I see it, own it, do it? Is the mantra from that book. From where I sit, how I'm empowered, what can I do about it? And so we'd be in meetings and somebody would start talking and a colleague would turn to him and say, "Hey, John, sounds like you slipped below the line." And it was just our quick shorthand way of saying, raise it up. Now, I think personally, it can be healthy to allow people a little bit of below the line time just to vent a little
blow out
bit
the lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can't live there.
No.
Individually or collectively as an organization, you just can't live there. Then the other part of control is, again, this notion of kind of piloting on. Here's the change, and we're just going to pilot on top of everything else that you have to do. This was pretty early in my career. I was getting really burned out in my job and frankly, the organization, and my resume was out on the street. This was back in the day where you actually printed resumes and put them out on the street. You didn't do it, online.
Let's pause for a second, allow the shock and awe to set in.
Yeah, I know. There were days like that. So I had a mentor inside the organization I trusted, and he was big in my life at the time, and he knew what my frustration was. It's just like I was working longer and longer hours. I was a single guy working weekends, and we had a lot going on. And he finally said, you could have the courageous conversation with your boss. Just simply lay out on the table, here's everything I've been asked to do, my best guesstimate of the time that it takes. I'm working X number of hours a week. I'm willing to work X number lower. Yeah. I am struggling to understand how to do this. If you were sitting in my shoes, how would you make this work? So it wasn't this combative approach of this is impossible. I can't get it all done, but it was really done in the spirit, for the most part, of partnership, asking my boss, help me understand how all these extra things that have been added to my plate, some of which were around change initiatives in the organization, because I don't see it. I believe I'm being asked to do something impossible here. So if you flip it from a leadership standpoint, is to be proactive in those conversations with your folks in terms of their priorities and what they have control of. Where are they spending their time? And engage them in those conversations. And John, there have been times as a leader where I'll say, you know what? This right here, let's pause it. Let's just absolutely hit the pause button. For the next 3 months, just making this up, don't spend any time on it. Would that help? Because it's not near as important as what we need to have you do over here. The other part of that conversation you can have, and this is hard, boy, this is hard for me to even say these words out loud, is I still need to have you do this, just don't do it as well. Meaning,
yes, yeah, we don't need to be best in class at that anymore. Yeah,
no longer best in class. Just get it to an acceptable level.
So
how much
difficult.
time would that free you? And again, it's irritating to even hear those words come out of my mouth. That's just not how I'm hardwired. But so that can help with this control thing. Is one, the mindset and language people are using, how much they're allowing themselves to slip below the line and just continue to harp and talk about things that are non-productive conversations. And then also just their physical time and energy and effort. Partner with them to understand you control every minute of the day. Right? You may not realize that, but you do, which means, by the way, if I invite you to a meeting and you don't see any value in being there, you are empowered to say, well, I could come to that hour-long meeting, or I could spend an hour on this thing over here related to this change initiative. So that's, again, culturally, some of you listening to this may go, oh my gosh, I get fired if I ever refused a meeting invite from someone. But we've got to be courageous enough to understand you control hitting the accept button on that meeting. And if you don't think there's value and your time is better spent somewhere else, ask yourself the question, can I have that conversation? And I think sometimes people are surprised that they have a lot more control over their time and what they're doing inside an organization than what they realize.
Yeah. Yep. Now, I'm a big fan of what you're describing in terms of partnering with your boss on those priorities. And, another version of that I personally had success with, similar to you later in my career, wasn't good at this at the beginning, tried to accomplish everything, ended up working tireless, 70, 80 hours in some cases. But later in my career, appreciating, if I can go engage my boss and partner with them to have them help me understand how this is all going to fit, that can be really powerful, as you describe. Another version of that I had success with is, let me come to you with some options, and then you choose one. And it's kind of like, okay, boss, I have A, B, C, and D on the platter right now. 3 of these will fit. I'm good with whatever. You tell me which 3.
Yep.
And sometimes I saw that really play out well. Oftentimes what's tipping the capacity for your team, particularly, I saw this a lot in when you're in a supporting department, change rolls out and it's got overlapping dependencies in other departments. So sometimes going to the leaders of those respective departments and saying, hey, the 2 of you, here's what's on deck for me and my team based on what the 2 of you are asking for. Big fan of all of it, by the way. Yep. A, B, C, and D, we can do 3. So the 2 of you would love you to come together and talk this out, and you let me and my team know. We'll be happy to take on A, B, and C, A, B, and D, whatever you want that to look like. And so, a powerful way to compromise, negotiate agreement around what these priorities should be. The other thing I thought about as you're describing, keeping people focused and helping them maintain control. Sometimes when you can get people real comfortable with the notion of sharing where they are spending their time, which, by the way, requires just a ton of safety. It's a bit of a time audit, a bit of a priority audit. And even the word audit doesn't sound great, but it's this notion of getting people comfortable with the idea. Let's look at everything that's pulling you in different directions and have an honest conversation about it. What you will find oftentimes is you'll find tasks and projects continuing that maybe shouldn't be.
Oh, yeah.
And it's because no one ever talked to that individual about the time that they're spending in that area that they no longer need to. No one helped them deprioritize it. The other reason that person might be continuing to be committed to it is when they think about their own level of control versus lack of control. It's like, well, this thing over here, I've got this a slam dunk for me. I'm going to continue doing it because it's something that I believe in, something I think adds value to the organization. No one's ever talked to me otherwise about it, so I'm going to continue doing that. And so it's their version of good intent. Out of good intent, I'm going to stay focused on something I feel I have control over.
Absolutely.
And so getting all of those cards on the table is a way for you to appreciate, what am I actually asking of the team? And it's hard to find that out without opening it up. You don't have full awareness as a leader to how every hour of every week is spent by your team and where their focus and energy and even worry and concern is spent, unless you're in the habit of talking about it. And so just a great overall communication habit I think we're alluding to is creating a safe space to just get the cards on the table with your team. Challenges related to the change, opportunities related to the change, priorities, things in the way, resources required. Real open and honest dialogue with your team, I think, is just what the doctor ordered to help keep your team focused on the right things, help avoid worry, concern, and distraction around the wrong things or things that, at least in the near term, we have no control over. But just a way to, again, mitigate the distraction that will arrive at your doorstep alongside the change that's being implemented. So, well, I think we've beat this horse to death, Doug, but in a good way. It's been a great series of conversations that I'm confident, really helpful to our listeners in terms of more effectively managing change. A lot of what I alluded to throughout this, and you as well, Doug, came from our exposure to Pritchett's research and work in this arena. So if you want to know more, certainly Doug and I can be a resource, but Pritchett, they deserve a ton of credit in terms of what they've done in this change leadership space. And certainly more for all of you if you're curious to learn from the Pritchett organization. So, but fun stuff to talk through, Doug. I appreciate you and I wading through this. It's a huge topic, as we said in the very first conversation. For some reason, as important and resonant as it's ever been, because change just continues to come fast and furious. And so the call, if you will, for leaders is to continually work to build their competencies around change leadership, because it's a requirement of the job, whether it's in your job description or not. Most organizations will require this of you as a leader. You've got to be good at it in today's day and age. So great stuff. Again, appreciate it, Doug. Thanks to all of you for listening in. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and tune in next time to see where Doug and I take the conversation next. Thanks.